if you read a book, if you watch a course, you will need to then be able to see a very, very clear change in how you play. And that is the only way to determine if a book is good or not. If the knowledge in there does not make you a better player within an instant of like few weeks, it's not a worthy book to continue reading. And along with this, what that basically means is that all the information that we learn needs to be focused on improving not just your knowledge in chess, but developing the process that you think through using in every game. I'll give you an example in here. I will show you a short example of this. Looking at the board right now, we think in terms of activity, of course. We think, first of all, what are the possible weaknesses of my opponent? How can I make my least active piece control more squares on the side of the opponent? I'll show this in here as well. Does my opponent leave free material in case, and well, it's still a beginner, so it's usually applying. And something that is very important to know as a beginner, the better understanding you'll have on activity and positional chess, you'll need to calculate less variations. I'll show you this example in here. My opponent is actually my trainer, who is much better than me. And you'll see how I lose back, by the way, for him in here. So knight f6, knight b to d2, c takes d4, and here I make a mistake. It's a small mistake, but that mistake actually made me lose the game because my trainer is much stronger than I decided to take with c takes on d4. That little take, which seems natural for the beginner, in higher levels is actually a blunder. I'll tell you why. What do you think this move does? This one move. So far I developed pieces, normally accordingly, like whatever, fine. It separates one of my pawns from its pawn group, right? Now I have 3 different pawn groups, and compared to my opponent that has only 2. His pawns are more connected and thus they are much stronger than mine. It's a small disadvantage that I have, but this one imbalance is what made it harder and harder for me to then go ahead and win. But the more imbalances that we cause for our opponent, the harder it is going to be for them to win and likelier for us to win. So an imbalance could be having a bishop in exchange for a knight, having separated pawns like I have in here. These are all small minor imbalances that happen. So c takes d4, I should have taken away with the knight probably, bishop c4. So I just continue normally, and up until this point, it's starting to basically show up. What my opponent needs to do is he only needs to think, where are my weaknesses? And the weakness that I have is very obvious, which is a pawn which is not defended by any other pawns. All he needs to do now is place more pressure into my weak d4 pawn, and eventually it could fall. So I've made another minor inaccuracy in there, but the point is still clear. Black is going to try to take away my pawn on d4 by placing as much pressure as it can on it. You're gonna see this in action. Knight takes, take with the rook, bishop f6. It's not like one move that suddenly destroys the whole game. It's kind of like a process. Bishop f6, aiming at my pawn. I've actually, because I was still kind of a beginner, made another inaccuracy, queen to d2, but he made the move knight to e7, rook e2, rook a d8, d1, a d1, rook a d8, d1, bishop takes on f3, removing a defender of the pawn. And you see how just by placing more pressure in one weakness, this one is going to end up falling. Knight to d5, bishop takes, queen to d3, rook d7, rook c2, moving the rook. And here he made a bit of an inaccuracy, queen e4. Now, how many attackers compared to defenders does this pawn have? This pawn has 3 defenders. It has 1, 2, 3, 4 attackers, but there's the queen here, so it just needs now a small tip to fall over. Queen e4, queen e4, g6, rook, queen takes on d5, rook takes d5, rook cd2, e5, and you see how this pawn is now going to fall over very shortly. He takes d4. All my opponent needs is an advantage of 1 to win, basically. The higher the level gets, the more strict you need to be with safeguarding your material, and in here I've made a mistake because the pawn is free. What do we take from this game? First of all, you need to ask yourself in every given situation, what are the weaknesses of my opponent? And if you look at this game, there is another term that we can think in, which is how can I take my least active piece and make it more active? If you see black, my opponent, and so did I, we never tried to move the same piece twice, basically. We tried to always make another piece which is active less, control more squares in the area of my opponent. So for example, this is important because in the intermediate levels you will see that players, they either underestimate how important activity is in terms of their pieces, and they will either move the same piece twice or move one piece to the wrong place, or will move one piece but they will make it tremble in front of another one, if it makes sense. An example for this could be when I moved my own knight to e4. I should have thought more about this rook because this one is not active yet. It's just on e3, on its starting square, and it hasn't moved yet. Therefore, the move that I made, knight to e4, was mistaken. So again, we think in two terms. One, what are the weaknesses of my opponent? How can I attack them? And two, what is my least active piece? And how can I progress it more towards the side of my opponent? In here, for example, I could have done, instead of knight e4, a3, after, let's say, for example, rook a to c8, rook to c1. Moving this rook, okay, in order to make it more active. Activity means controlling more squares. I'll show you a short example of this. In very general terms, what is activity? Activity is how much squares does one piece controls. Which knight is better on the board right now? Of course, the knight in the center. He's better because he controls 8 squares in comparison to the knight that controls 2 squares on a1. And that's why he's better. And it's the exact same thing that you've seen before with my rook. Basically, with the previous example, what I should have done is used my rook in order to exert more pressure into the side of the opponent. And that would have been a better way to deal with my situation. So, what do we take from this video? First of all, every book or source of knowledge that we take or that we learn from should have something to do with increasing our play style, making our play better very soon. It's why a lot of chess channels that you see on YouTube do not really help, because yes, they feed you information, but they do not grant you a better thinking process. For example, a prodigy, a child which is suddenly very, very good at chess, doesn't really have the time to learn the information of the game, memorizing openings, ideas, etc. But he has a very developed process of thinking. He knows which moves are better in a given situation. Therefore, everything we watch should be directly enhancing our playstyle. That's the first one. Second thing, before every move we make, we think, what are the weaknesses of my opponent? For example, for me right here, on d4. That's the second thing that we ask all of the time. And the third thing we ask is, how can I progress towards the enemy side of the board and take or attack something and make my pieces more active there? I'll see you in the next video tomorrow. Thank you for watching. Bye bye.